Thanks very much for joining us.
You bet, Wolf. Good to be with you.
I know you've been briefed on this individual, Abdul Razak Ali Artan, but do you know why he actually came to Washington, D.C.? His credit card records show he went to a Home Depot and bought this big knife.
I don't, and I think law enforcement is still trying to find out what took place in the days and indeed the hours leading up to this attack. It does appear that the period of radicalization may have been fairly quick in the sense that he was a consumer of this online propaganda, Anwar Alaki and perhaps others, but there doesn't seem to have been much indication that he was going to act out in this violent way that would have tipped off law enforcement or potentially even his own family. This may be one of those attacks that regrettably just wasn't capable of being prevented because there don't seem to be any outward signs of radicalization that we have seen as of yet.
It looks like the attacker at Ohio State University was, as you say, self-radicalized online, social media. But in an interview back in August at Ohio State University, he said he was fearful to pray in public and was worried about being stereotyped as a Muslim. Do you believe that may have played a role in his radicalization?
Well, I do think that there's a risk that when people feel alienated, that they're more susceptible to this radical kind of propaganda, which is why it's so counterproductive for people to, for example, make promises about banning all Muslims or creating a Muslim registry. This is the exact kind of thing that would tend to alienate a community, break down the bonds of interaction between law enforcement and the Muslim community, the free flow of information. We want people to be able to come forward to law enforcement if they're worried about someone being radicalized. We don't want anyone in America to feel isolated or alienated. Indeed, a lot of the problems in Europe are because of the balkanization and the alienation of the Muslim community there. So this is a concern, and we have to make sure that our reaction to it doesn't aggravate the problem.
You know, ISIS promotes this idea of a clash of civilizations, tries to radicalize people through social media by arguing that Muslims aren't accepted in Western countries. As you point out, did the president-elect play into that by pushing that temporary ban on Muslims coming into the United States, the anti-refugee stance that he advocated on the campaign trail?
Oh, absolutely. I think those kind of statements that don't discriminate between practitioners of one of the great faiths and people who would pervert that faith like Al-Qaeda and ISIS are really contributing to the problem. So yes, those kind of statements made by the president-elect I think were deeply damaging. The statements General Flynn made about fear of all Muslims being rational, those kind of things are deeply destructive. They play into the Al-Qaeda and ISIS narrative of a clash of civilizations, and we need to be very careful to avoid making the ideological problem bigger by playing into that kind of a narrative.
I just want to button this up. This individual, Abdul Razak Ali Artan, you believe this was definitely a terror attack, that he was at a minimum inspired by terror organizations overseas, whether Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Al-Shabaab, or some other terror group. But is there any evidence you've seen it was more than that, that he was actually directed to do this?
We haven't seen any evidence that he was directed or in contact with a foreign terrorist organization. So yes, I think this is absolutely a terrorist attack. I think it was the product of online radicalization. It's still obviously very early in the investigation, and we are now exploiting his electronics. We may learn a lot more. It's always possible we'll find something to alter that conclusion. I don't think we're going to be altering the conclusion that it was a terror attack, but we may learn more about his motivations in the days and weeks to come.
Let's talk about the president-elect's position. He's already appointed one general. You mentioned him, retired Lieutenant General Mike Flynn, as his national security advisor in the White House. He's considering at least 3 more generals for his cabinet, retired generals David Petraeus, James Mattis, John Kelly. If the president-elect goes ahead and names these people to senior cabinet positions, are you at all concerned this could compromise potentially what some critics are calling civilian control of the government?
Well, I would be concerned that he could potentially create really an echo chamber with a very military and defense-oriented point of view surrounding him. That could lead him to certain foreign policy conclusions that the use of military force is one of the only or the preferred tool in dealing with any kind of a crisis. So yes, it would concern me if he populates his entire cabinet or so many important people around him, all with people recently out of uniform. That being said, some of the people that he's been considering are very talented people, and they by all means shouldn't be excluded because of their military service. It's a tremendous asset. But we do need to keep in mind this bedrock principle of civilian control of the military, and I think that the President would benefit by having multiple points of view and not simply those that are predominantly military in nature.
Let me ask you what I asked Congressman Darrell Issa. Would you be okay with General Petraeus being the Secretary of State?
Look, I think General Petraeus is enormously capable, and I think one of the most brilliant military minds the country has produced. It was a terrible loss to the country when we lost his service. I don't know how the President-elect grapples with all the vigorous attacks, though, he made on Secretary Clinton vis-a-vis the handling of classified information. I'm not sure how he can square that with the selection of General Petraeus, but that's an issue for the President-elect to figure out.
Congressman Adam Schiff of California, thanks very much for joining us.